Thank you, Professor Shankaran. I will now invite Professor Dr. Mohan Gopal to offer his remarks. Professor Gopal served as the director of the National Judicial Academy of the Supreme Court of India for 5 years between 2006 and 11. He's also the Vice Chancellor of the National Law School in Bangalore prior to that. Many of us have probably witnessed him opening arguments for the EWS case, Janhit Abhiyan, before the Supreme Court, probably on live law. Professor Gopal, without further ado, I welcome you to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Malavika. My warm greetings to my very distinguished fellow panelists, Professor Kamla Shankaran and Professor Adam. Thank you for this invitation, Professor Chauhan, and the privilege of being here. I'm delighted to be here. I've come here through the courtesy of Professor Ranbir Singh at the very beginning when this facility was very new. And I think it has really been remarkably well preserved, and it has really grown into a very lovely campus, very well designed and so on. And I'm sure it will be even more wonderful if the workers are given equal rights. and it will be more enjoyable. If not, I'm always available pro bono with no charges at all. I'm 69 years old. There's no need, no excuse for me to be anything but pro bono. And so I'm not saying everyone should be pro bono, but certainly if you're at my stage in life, when there is no excuse to be not pro bono, one should be pro bono. So I'm available if you wish to make this campus even nicer than it is. But it's a wonderful campus and a great atmosphere. So thank you to be here. I'm going to, I'm used to being asked how many hours do you want to speak on this, so it's a huge topic for me and it's very difficult to compress it. I very much appreciate the very interesting perspectives, as usual, given by Professor Alam and Professor Shankaran. Professor Alam looked at it from the point of view of different groups and how do we understand India, and I want to come to that. And Professor Shankaran asked us to think in new ways about the constitutionality, assessing the constitutionality of the 103rd Amendment Act, including by resort to the standard of strict scrutiny and so on. So that's also relevant. But I want to start by, there's no title here to the topic, but the title has the words affirmative action. So what I want to do is I want to request you to revisit some of the fundamental ideas on the basis of which we are approaching this topic. And one fundamental idea is affirmative action, right? And the other fundamental idea is reservation. And the third fundamental idea is, why do we have 16.4, 15.4 discrimination? What is the rationale for that? And so this is the main thing which I would like to invite you to reconsider yourself. And I'll share some ideas with you on that. And then we'll come to what the implications are very briefly to understand the judgment in a different way. And we go forward. So it's now 5:23. So we have only 7 minutes left to our scheduled time. Sorry. Okay. And Malvika has kindly granted extra time to 6 o'clock. Professor Chauhan, having rejected my initial application to allow me to appear online, has also approved this request and has arranged with the Indigo Airlines to delay my flight so that I won't miss it. I have to go to Kochi from here. So let's say we'll go up to 6 o'clock, and then we must have some Q&A. So we'll try to leave some time for that before that. So very quickly, almost telegraphically, I don't think we can call this affirmative action. I think those who are calling what is going on under 15.4 and 16.4 as affirmative action are borrowing it undoubtedly from United States usage of affirmative action. That's where this phrase comes from. And it shows to me an anti-reservation mindset. Why can't we call it reservation? Because we can't digest it. So we're looking for some other way which, sort of white people have used, civilized people have used, which must be a little bit legitimate because white people use it, must be okay. So we call it affirmative action because that's more kind of, upper crust than calling it reservation. But it's not affirmative action. If you look at, I would suggest you look at two books to understand why I'm saying this. One is a book by Professor John Carson of Michigan, where I first met Malavika when she was doing her LLM there, published in 2007, called The Measure of Merit. Measure of Merit. And the second, of course, much better known book is Sandel's Tyranny of Merit. But Measure of Merit is a little more relevant to us because Professor Carson, it's a massive book. He really goes into, he compares the struggle of the United States and France after they overthrew the aristocracy. I'll now quote from him just a few lines. He says, having toppled aristocratically organized societies in the name of natural rights and people sovereignty, United States and France struggled with the question, what would be put in their place? How could a new elite be selected and justified within a political ideology that also celebrates equality and human and universal rights? How do you reconcile elitism with equality? How, in other words, could inequality be rendered legitimate in such a society? Because aristocratic society rejected equality and accepted inequality. But after you overthrew the aristocracy, then you cannot reject equality, but you don't want to reject elitism itself, because the Americans and French people, the French system today, up to this day, accept the fact that human beings are not equal, that some are better than others, like they did during the aristocracy. It may be natural, it may be as a result of nurture, we don't know for sure, it may be a mixture, but not all human beings are similarly talented or qualified or capable. They accept the fact that there is difference in capacity between human beings. And that is the basis of elitism, because if that is accepted, you want the better humans to rule us and to lead us. And you want to sort out the less capable from the more capable. And so lack of time, otherwise I can read a little more from Carson. Basically, they came up with standardized testing, starting in France and bringing it in the US. You're all here because of standardized testing. Standardized testing has been completely rejected by now all over the world as not telling us anything about anyone. But it serves only one purpose, and that is legitimizing inequality. Because you're sitting here, many of people cannot sit here. That's inequality. They've been denied admission. How do you legitimize that? By saying you're better than them. And how do we know you're better than them? Because we've done standardized testing, objective. And so they develop standardized testing, as Professor Carson says, to legitimize inequality and justify inequality, because they accepted elitism and rejected the proposition which was expressed on August 27th, 1947, in the Constituent Assembly, 12th day of independence, by two Dalit members of the Constituent Assembly, Mr. Muniswamy Pillai and Mr. Nagappa, both from the Madras British Presidency, one from the Telugu speaking area, one from the Tamil speaking area. They said in brief to the Assembly, the British have left, but there is fear in the minds of the scheduled castes. Whole country celebrating, the British has said. These gentlemen are telling the Constituent Assembly on the floor of the House on the record, please go to August 27, 1947, verbatim record, you will see these interventions by Nagappa and Muniswamy. They say, we have fear, we are afraid. Why? Because the Hindus are coming to power. This is their words, not my words. The Hindus are coming to power. In that day and age, only the upper caste was allowed to call itself Hindu. Caste Hindu, or Hindu meant upper caste. The others were outcasts. Outcast means out of caste. Now they're accused of being casteist. All the centuries they were told you're out of caste. So I don't know how outcasts can be casteist. Only Savarnas can be casteist because only they had caste. But now they are not casteist. They are meritorious people. And the Avarnas are casteist people, although they were denied caste for all these years. So they said the Hindus are coming back to power. Will they bring back Hindu Rashtra, Hindu Raj? Will they revive Varnashrama Dharma to harass the Harijans? Nagappa said, we may be dumb, totally opposing the approach of the Americans and the French. He said, we may be dumb, we may be illiterate, but do not take advantage of our dumbness and illiteracy to deny us our due share, to deny us our humanity. We want in this country our due share. In other words, they were saying, we do not want an elitist society in this country. We want representation. This was not new. In 1931, first roundtable conference, must be part of this teaching of constitutional law, must begin with this document, in my view. It is almost, to my knowledge, never included in a constitutional law course, to my knowledge, in our country, which is a document presented by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to the first roundtable conference, which was a memorandum setting out 8 safeguards or conditions on behalf of the depressed classes. In his speech, Dr. Ambedkar says that we are here. Good evening, sir. Very nice to see you. Yes, sir. In his speech, Dr. Ambedkar says, we are here, I'm here with a mandate. One part of that mandate is to demand responsible government. And that was the universal demand from India by everyone. We want responsible government, means government responsible to the people of the country. And the British did not reject that. They believed in trickle-down responsiveness of elections here and there. But they could not reject it. So Ambedkar said, yes, I am here on behalf of the depressed classes with 2 mandates. One is to demand a responsible government. But he said, I have another mandate. And that is, we demand a representative government. He is the only person to have demanded that India must have a representative government. And that demand has been buried in the last 7 decades. And the quality of responsible government has been thoroughly undermined. Now, in these demands, you must read this document, this memorandum. And there, as I said, there are 8 conditions. Condition number 4 is adequate representation in the legislature. That's where he says a demand. He did not ask for a communal electorate. He never used those words. That was used to denigrate his demand. He said, for 10 years, the depressed classes must be able to select, must have separate electorates to select their own representatives for 10 years, after which he said, you can have reservation and joint electorates, so that their own leadership will develop. He did not say, as our very revered Mahatma Gandhi said, I am the representative of all Indians, Muslims, Harijans, everyone. I am the representative. Ambedkar did not say, I am the representative. He said, you have invited me here. I'm conveying the request for the depressed classes, not that they should accept me as their leader, but they should have separate electorates to select their own leaders. Now, this demand was accepted by the British government. We had the Satyagraha, fast unto death, Pune Pact. We know all that. And that was rejected. Fortunately for us, we can assume that Gandhiji did not read beyond condition number 4 and come to condition number 5, which asked for adequate representation in the public services. And there he said, he drafted actually, in all of these, he drafted constitutional clauses to be included in the 1935 Act, because these roundtable conferences were intended to prepare the draft of have consultation on the draft of the 1935 Act. So he actually had constitutional language on each of this, not just a comment, very beautifully drafted constitutional provision. So this condition number 5 is the original draft of what later becomes 16.4. This is purely written by Ambedkar, not a result of a negotiated compromise in the Constituent Assembly. And what does he write there? He says, in essence, he says, but using his words, he first says that we have a problem. What is that problem? The problem is that the Hindu upper caste, his words, not mine, have monopolized public services in this country and are abusing this monopoly to benefit themselves and deny justice, equity, and good conscience. As a good lawyer, jurist, he uses these words, to the depressed classes. And he says, what is the solution? Now, in parallel, he had also made a speech saying, when the British leave India, power should be passed not to an aristocracy or an oligarchy. These are his words, but to the people of India. So he says there is an oligarchy that is running, monopolizing public services and monopolizing power in this country. We have to dismantle it. How do we dismantle it? He had a very specific proposal in this draft. He said that public service commissions must be set up in the Constitution. And the responsibility of the Public Service Commission must be to ensure due, his words, due and adequate representation of all communities. Due and adequate representation of all communities, not classes, not castes, all communities. And how would they do it? By regulating recruitment into public services, his words, to ensure adequate, due and adequate, which means for small communities, it must be adequate. You can't just be proportional to the population. Some of the large communities may have to give up some of their share. Some of the small communities may have to be given an increased share so that they are meaningful voices. When he says communities, he's not referring just to castes. In today's terms, he would be referring to women, to LGBT, to any group that considers itself a community, must have due and adequate representation in the public services. Legislature is already dealt with, executive and judiciary. So he used the phrase regulating recruitment into public services. Is that affirmative action? He did not use the word reservation. How did the word reservation come? Where did it come from into 16.4? It came from the practice of Maharashtra, Madras, Mysore, and Travancore, where because of the pressure of the better off groups, the ruling, either the colonial powers or the Rajas, gave some space to basically the middle castes. It was basically an anti-Brahmin or non-Brahmin movement, although ironically in Kerala, the Malayali memorial was on behalf of Nambudiri Brahmins, saying that the Tamil Brahmins and what they call the foreign Brahmins are not giving them adequate space. And they did get Nayars and Nambudiris, they got that space. So in that sense, it was the ruling elites that called this reservation. But the depressed classes through Dr. Ambedkar never called it reservation. They called it regulation of recruitment into public services to ensure due and adequate representation of all communities in public services. That's what we're dealing with here, not affirmative action. Representative democracy. Representative democracy. That was what was mirrored on the August 27th, 1947 comment by Muniswamy Nagapal, reminding them that, look, we are here for a representative government. Have you ever heard of a Supreme Court judge after 72 years with the last name Yadav? There has never been a Supreme Court judge with the last name Yadav, to my knowledge. There's the largest Hindu community in Kerala is Irava. They've had judges and attorneys generals, advocate generals, and Irava has never become a judge of the Supreme Court in 72 years. And so on and so forth. If you apply Ambedkar's principle, not as a quota, but in a representative way, like the United States Supreme Court did when Justice Stephen Breyer stepped down. What did they say? They said, look, 12 to 13% of the population, am I right, is black, African American. They said, we have an African American male, Clarence Thomas, but we've never had an African American woman. Maybe 6-7% of the population, but very important, very vibrant, very wonderful group. In fact, I was reading somewhere that they are the group that produces the single largest extent of new businesses, small businesses, very dynamic group. So consensus emerged that they must have representation. And we must appoint an African-American, a black woman as the next Supreme Court judge. And they did that. They looked at several black women, very distinguished. They found a very, very distinguished, amazing, you must have watched the confirmation process on television, amazing woman. They appointed her as a judge. Why? Because representation is important for them. And today, and this has been the case since 2010, the US Supreme Court, just 9 judges. There is not a single member of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male community on that court. It is entirely a minority court. The single largest group are Catholics, who are the most hated minority. 150 years ago, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants would have riots against Catholic, attack Catholic, churches and so on, right? So they have 100% non-dominant group Supreme Court. It's like having an Indian Supreme Court with no upper caste. 34 judges. Upper caste male, let's say. Now, if you look at it from the US Supreme Court point of view, or the British, UK Supreme Court point of view, European courts point of view, they're all these cutting-edge, latest market economies are always monitoring representation because they understand, remember, taxation, no taxation without representation. At the heart of their idea of democracy is, we don't want to be ruled by others. We want representation. We want to rule ourselves. So if you look at all these cases, all these jurisdictions, you will find there is a central concern about representative democracy. And that is the demand that was raised by Ambedkar in 1930-31 and reiterated. And what we today call reservation is regulation of recruitment to public services to ensure due and adequate representation of all communities, not just castes. Okay. And this is, okay, now to come back to Carson and in that point, where does affirmative action come there? So the Americans and the French believing in elitism. Now I'm at the second point, longer point I made is to show we reject elitism. We want representation. They want representation, but they also want elitism. We don't want elitism. We want, because we know that elitism is not scientifically defined, that merit is defined by context, not by birth. And every human being is equally valuable, and you never know when your life will depend on a human being that you never considered meritorious or worthy. So the challenge for us in the rest of the world, us indigenous people all over the world, is to accept and deploy the infinite inherent potential of every human being, rather than to run them through a standardized test and trash those who don't come out through it. So we didn't accept that. But where does the word affirmative action come from? So the compromise Carson says that was reached is, okay, we have overthrown the aristocracy. We reject the idea that the proportion of more capable and less capable people is greater in the aristocratic classes than in the working class. We reject that. We all know that we find amazing people in all sections of society, not just amongst the high-born or the high-placed, right? So they recognize that. And they said, okay, our task is to find the meritorious, the elite, the superior people in all segments of society, working class, upper class, middle class, men, women, different races. Hidden amongst them are the meritorious. We have to find them. And then we have to develop them and make them part of a meritocracy, an elite meritocracy that must rule us. That consensus emerged, and affirmative action is a process of finding the meritorious amongst segments that were denied the opportunity to become part of the elite, the meritorious, and to make them meritorious and part of the elite. But building a new elite is not part of the aspirations of the freedom movement of India. As the Dalit members said to the Constituent Assembly, we may be dumb, we may be illiterate, but recognize our humanity and give us our due share. That is the philosophy behind us. Therefore, affirmative action has no place in India. No place in India. What we must talk about is the challenge of representation. Now, a second point. Now that what is reservation? That's a simpler point. Reservation is only a tool to achieve representation. And what Ambedkar wanted was regulation commensurate with representation, not a fixed quota. So if you have X community, if you've got out of 34 judges, 33 are Yadavs, then no need to reserve seats for Yadavs. In fact, you may have to reserve seats for Brahmins to give them, 1 or 2 seats. So you regulate, you modulate the extent of reservations as necessary, but to ensure representation. But you monitor representation. Today, we don't monitor representation at all. And we assume that 4 communities that dominate India, dominate all these segments, simply because they're meritorious. And so you don't monitor merit because you've already got standardized testing to filter merit. So anyone who's come through standardized testing is meritorious. A falsehood that has been rejected everywhere. And therefore, we understand that reservation is only a tool for representation. And if we can find a better tool, I said this to the Supreme Court directly, I said it in other places also, we will throw reservation into the Arabian Sea. We have no interest in reservation. In fact, reservation is an idea of the Savarnas. It is the heart of Chaturvarnya. This manual scavenging is reserved for you. This priestly job is reserved for me. There has never been a charter in the subcontinent by the British or the Maharajas or the Muslims that guarantee equality and equal opportunity to the common people of this country until 1950. And Ambedkar knew that this clause is in that charter of 1950 because of the struggle of the depressed classes. Because if it was reflective of the ideology and ideals and aspirations of the ruling classes, we would have had it in many charters before 1950. And so Ambedkar said no more than 50% reservation. Why? Because he knows I have to protect equality. Equality is here only because of my people. This is not from the upper caste. This is from us. This is our creation. We have to protect this baby. It's our baby. And reservation is a tool of Chaturvarnya that we should use. Not reservation, the regulation of recruitment, which was called reservation in 1604, should be used in order to get representation and end the abuse of power and the monopoly created by the dominant classes in the public services. So reservation, that's why no one has a problem with, I've never heard anyone say that putting a pole vaulter into a medical seat because he's good in pole vault will affect the merit of doctors. I don't see any logic for putting sports persons into medical colleges. But no one says that's going to destroy logic, destroy merit in medical colleges. But if you put a scheduled caste or a Avarna into a medical seat, oh my God, what kind of doctors will we have? Because these are hopeless people with no capacity. But a pole vaulter, maybe he'll pole vault into the operating theater, one day to faster than the Dalit. And no one says women's reservation. I don't believe any of this affects merit because we don't understand merit. But no, I've not heard anyone criticize that women's reservation will destroy merit, or giving reservation to children of central government employees to Kendriya Vidyalaya. I am a child of a central government employee who studied in a central school, but there was no reservation then. But no one said that because of me, merit was destroyed, right? And so on and so forth. So we understand that our problem is with this SC, ST, OBC, these Avarnas getting, doing roles. You have no problem in giving manual scavengers 100% reservation from the communities condemned to do that. That will not affect the merit of manual scavenging. It won't be done properly unless a few Brahmins or a few Kshatriyas or Vaishyas do it. This manual scavenging will become a problem. So let's stop this 100% Valmikis in manual scavenging. I've never heard anyone say that. So we understand that this prejudice against reservation is purely casteist. And that's why we don't want to say reservation. We want to say affirmative action. Sounds very American, right? Not relevant to us. So reservation is only a tool. It's a tool of Chaturvarnya. We are using it as the most moderate tool available to get representation, 50%, because we want to protect our baby equality. Now, are there other tools? Yes, there are. What Mahathir Mohamad did in 70s and late 70s and 1980, when I was teaching, the dinosaurs used to roam in 1980 to 83, I was teaching law, the Faculty of Law, National University of Singapore. That was the time this policy was being implemented. Mahathir Mohamad put in a policy called Bhumiputra policy. And he said in Malaysia, no one, and there the oligarchy was Chinese, the economic oligarchy, and the Malays were very poor. So he didn't bother about 50% reservation in sweeper jobs will make the Malays better off. He brought in a law, Bhumiputra law. What did he say? He said, no company can be established in Malaysia, no firm can be established in Malaysia unless a Malay, a Bhumiputra, is an equal partner and equity partner in the business. Even if he does not contribute a paisa of money or any other kind of capital, you cannot start a business without a Bhumiputra partner. And where are we almost half a century later? The Malays are better off. Malaysia is better off. The Chinese are also fine. But Malaysia has been transformed. Now, if you don't like reservation, we can have the equivalent of the Bhumiputra policy, that you cannot start a business here in this country without having a SC, ST person as a partner, mandatorily, equity partner who will share in that. And there are other options like this in other countries. So what Ambedkar suggested through regulation of recruitment to public enterprises was the most moderate option. And this is only a tool. So the fight is not for reservation, it is for representation. And the question we have to ask is, do we have a representative democracy in this, a representative state in this country? No, we have an oligarchy of 4 communities at the national level, 2 communities in my state in Kerala, and every other state has 1 or 2 or 3 communities. and bulk of the positions belong to them. For example, in Kerala, there has never been a Malayali Muslim chief secretary in Kerala. One UP Muslim IAS officer became a chief secretary for a little while, from 1956 till today. There has been only one police chief who is Muslim for 25 days, from 1956 till today. And other backward classes and communities, similarly, one or two. The rest are all from these oligarchic Malayali communities. So I can give you examples, a lot of data to show that we are highly oligarchic as a country. Now, there's a lot of study. There's an MIT professor who's written a book on oligarchy, because he says that if you have an oligarchy, a country will never move forward, will be destroyed. Why? Because all the policies of the state will be geared to ensure that the oligarchy's goals are met and the oligarchy is sustained. The rest can go fly a kite, but that's all that the state does. So you cannot really, no country can develop with an oligarchy. Now, what Ambedkar said, please remember, is oligarchy should be stopped on behalf of any community. He didn't say there should be a Dalit oligarchy or an OBC oligarchy. So the vaccination against an oligarchy is to have a state and all other sectors where there is representation from all communities. That's the medicine against oligarchy. That's what we are talking about. Now we come to the issue, having dealt with the concept of affirmative action and dealt with the concept of reservation. We come to EWS. EWS is supposed to be reservation for economically weaker sections. So I filed a case in the High Court, which is Kerala, which they've refused to. They will neither admit nor reject nor hear. And I made a simple proposition: if this is for economically weaker sections, you give it to people based on their poverty, just income. Look at their BPL card and nothing else. Give it to the poorest people. But what do we find EWS as? EWS basically is for socially and educationally forward classes. What does that mean? Now, we all know that there are socially and educationally backward classes who are upper caste. Can anyone give me an example of a person from an upper Savarna Dvija background who is a member of a backward class? Apurva, can you think of someone? Have you heard the name Narendra Modi? We know he's an OBC, and his community is a Bania community by all accounts. But they're backward class. Manipuri Brahmins, backward class. Kerala, Velakathala Nayars, backward class. Now, Mr. Modi's community, both Ganji community, I understand, based on is a genuinely backward class. They may be Bania, Vaishya, but they do the oil pressing thing, and many of them are not, they don't have representation, they don't have voice, they don't have. So some years ago, before he became Prime Minister, they were made a backward class. And it's correct. Manipuri Brahmins, many other upper castes are in the backward classes. Have you ever heard SC, ST or backward class, Avarna backward class protesting that these upper caste communities are being made OBC and given a share of reservations? Never. So let's first understand that EWS is not for all upper castes. It is not for the upper castes that are backward, socially and educationally backward. It is only for the upper castes that are socially and educationally forward classes. The creme de la creme. And therefore, the creamy layer cutoff has to be very high, 66,666 rupees or less income per month, 5 acres of rural land and so on. Because otherwise you're talking of creme de la creme. You have excluded the socially and educationally backward classes amongst the upper castes. And so you got to put this thing very high. Now, these guys are so powerful that they can make, not only these guys are getting one job or one educational seat, but they have come from communities that are so powerful that they can make a whole college for each of these guys. Talking of other means available, not to the state, but to these communities. But why are they doing this? Because they want to take away 10% reservations from the backward classes. Not because they need it, because they want to take away 10%. 10% is massive. And these MDPI indices show that there can never be 10% of the population of India which is poor amongst the social and educational forward classes. Yes, upper caste, there are many upper caste poor. 2 days ago, I had a young boy drive me, I gave my car in for servicing, and he brought me back. And he comes from an upper caste Nair background. He said his father was a wage laborer. So there are poor amongst them. But if they are not getting reservation, their community can apply and become backward classes and get reservation. No need to create EWS. And many have done so. If anyone has been left out, they're free to do so. Then why EWS? Because you want to cut down reservation for those who are excluded. That's why I said, I'm not here to argue against the exclusion. In fact, the main point I made was I didn't cite this, but it's based on, some of you will recognize this, John Rawls' difference principle, where he says that you can discriminate against someone, you can treat someone unequally for only one and only one reason, for the benefit of the least advantaged or the most disadvantaged. So I said to the court, I said, I'm not here to argue against exclusion, because I told my friends, look, you lose that. But I'm here to argue against the inclusion. I said, on what constitutional principle can you violate equality in the Constitution to discriminate in favor of the most powerful? And on the 5th day of argument, that was not live streamed, Chief Justice Lalit, sitting in open court, reflected on this. And he said to the open court, from the bench, remarks from the bench, he said, all these years, he said, it's almost exactly verbatim, but I can't swear it is verbatim. He said, all these years we've been used to having upper classes, he didn't use the word caste, upper classes discriminated against in favor of the less advantaged people. But he said, this is the first time that we are going to discriminate against the least advantaged in favor of the most advantaged. And he said, that is the real issue in this case, he said. But neither the dissent nor the majority judgment dealt with this central issue. And I would submit that this strict scrutiny standard, which is applicable to test the constitutionality of statutes, which allege discrimination, and then you test them against the test of compelling interest and narrow tailoring, is not relevant to reviewing the constitutionality of an amendment to the Constitution. America doesn't deal with that problem. It's an exercise of constituent power. It can be tested only on the basis of violation of basic structure. So we basically argued that it's a violation of I argued two principles of the basic structure. One is representative democracy and the other is equality. Equality not by the exclusion, but by the inclusion. Because you have the equality, its very essence of equality of the Constitution is you will not discriminate in favor of the privileged and the powerful. We are back to Chaturvarnya if you do that. And so this argument is not dealt with by either case, and I put that in the review petition. One reason I frankly did not appear in the morning here was we have a review petition, and that's before Justice Butt, so I didn't want to be around Justice Butt, who I love very much and respect very much in all ways. He's an exceptional human being and a judge and a jurist. But this is the real issue. This is where a Rubicon has been crossed. This is why I told the bench that this is the ADM Jabalpur of social justice. because you're writing into the Constitution that it is legitimate to discriminate in favor of the powerful. Next, we can have reservation only for men. Poor men. Poor meanings, not economically poor, but bichara, men. So EWS is really not economically weaker section reservation. Is that really 610 or? Okay. I'm almost done, but sorry. It is not a really economically weaker section reservation. It is reservation for the socially and educationally forward classes with a creamy layer cutoff. Exclusively for social and educationally forward classes. I have an actual case. I'm talking to them, not case file, but actual problem in Kerala. There is a Kumbhara community in Kerala, and one subset amongst them, extremely poor community. One subset amongst them, relevant to say here in Hyderabad, are people who some centuries ago, they don't know when, migrated from Telugu-speaking regions to Kerala. And they speak a language which has kind of a mixed Telugu, Malayalam kind of thing. And the people in Kerala are afraid of them because they talk these strange languages and they have some strange customs, quote unquote, strange customs and rituals. They're very different. They are part of 89 communities that are given 3% reservation. And they have never get reservation. And they're extremely poor. In Kerala, the Nambudiri, who doesn't get this 66,000 or whatever the number in Kerala is, and 5 acres or whatever the number in Kerala is, below the creamy layer, is eligible for reservations under EWS, but this Kumbhara is not. For a reservation that's called economically weaker section reservation, adding insult to injury. Why don't you amend the Constitution and say, we want to give reservations for social and educationally forward classes with a creamy layer cutoff? Have the guts to do that. Have the honesty to do that. Don't smuggle this into a reservation called reservation for economically weaker sections while you're denying these poor Kumbhara's reservation, giving it to the Nambudiri and the Nambiar and so on and so forth. I have nothing against these communities. They're all wonderful communities. I'm just saying they happen to be social and educationally forward classes. I have a lot of respect and admiration for them. But even they would not feel comfortable if they knew that they were snatching a seat away from these Kumbharas and others who are not getting reservation. So what I'm arguing is the words other than, EWS is for other than 15, those who are the classes mentioned in 15.4, 16.4 must be interpreted as other than the people who actually receive reservations under 15.4, 16.4. Not simply that you are born into a community which, not at your application or request, is classified by the state as belonging to a particular, into a family that is then classified as belonging to a particular community, and the state decides that community is eligible for OBC, ST like Kumbhara, and therefore you are not eligible for EWS. If you are eligible to pension, you are not a pensioner. You become a pensioner when you receive pension. Similarly, you are eligible for 15.4, 16.4, but you should be excluded from EWS only if you actually receive. You have not excluded people who receive women's reservations, sportsmen reservations, domiciliary reservations, children of reservations. None of them are excluded from EWS. You can be eligible for a multiple set of reservations and still get EWS. But if one of them is OBC, SC, ST reservation, you're knocked out. This is not right. Either say you should be, there's almost no one like that, you should not be eligible to any kind of reservation. But you can't single out just SC, ST and OBC reservation and say that knocks off your eligibility. So we can interpret it to say other than means those who may be eligible, but take the Kumbharas. They're eligible but don't receive it. So don't knock the Kumbharas out. And you include them in EWS and make the EWS genuinely EWS. Give it only on the basis of multidimensional poverty index and nothing else. Do not require that this must be a You must be a member of a socially and educationally forward class to get EWS. So now, in Kerala, I call EWS enemy of the weaker section. That's the right way to understand it. It's not economically weaker section, it's enemy of the weaker section. Because it's taking away, depriving weaker sections, whether even of the upper caste and of the others, it's depriving the genuinely economic weaker sections from representation, not from jobs or poverty, from representation, from having their voice in the legislature and the judiciary. Now that's unforgivable. So therefore, we have to rethink affirmative action, we have to rethink reservation, replace it with representation, and see it only as a tool. And the tool is regulation of recruitment into public services. And we must also rethink the exclusion. And I do think that exclusion of people, see, obviously, you can only get one type of reservation. So once you get reservation, you're automatically under another category or excluded. No need to say that. But at least now, if you want to keep it, rethink the exclusion. Lastly, I want to say that we should hopefully we should be aware of the fact that there is a review petition, and these arguments still need to be made. The arguments that were not addressed by the judgments need to be addressed, and we will do so. So we won't take it as a done deal till the review petition is rejected or dismissed. But I do want to say, in conclusion, that there is immense value in simply standing up and speaking for ourselves without worrying about whether we win or lose cases. I'm very liberated from all this. If I lose cases, all the cases I argue, I still don't lose any clients, because I have no revenue from clients, and I don't lose clients because the clients have no option, to get someone free to argue for them, either it's me or no one, and so I don't have to win cases to remain in the practice of law, but I do. So with that acceptance, I would say that the value I see is that when you make an argument, people are all, as Nagappa and Muniswami Pillai said, everyone is an equally intelligent human being. And if you make an argument that's reasonable to them, like I do, I've made these arguments to all kinds of audiences. They fully understand what you're saying. And when you can make it in a court and it gets publicity, then it gets shared, then there will be greater public awareness, and that can be a very important contribution. So I would encourage all of you to be critical about judgments, critical about laws, critical about what goes on in society, and to use your professional license to make the best arguments you can in the interest of the most marginalized people. And then I think this evening would be well spent. Thank you so much.